This is Chick2Chick Uncut, raw and unfiltered.
What happened at the governor's mansion here in Pennsylvania over the weekend was absolutely horrific. It was horrible, terrible, and heartbreaking. Late Saturday night into Sunday morning, a suspected arsonist somehow scaled the fence at the governor's residence, had a hammer, broke a window, threw Molotov cocktails into the residence, and then somehow managed to escape, the entire time evading state troopers who were assigned to the governor's residence to protect the governor. And while all of this was going on, the governor was upstairs with his family asleep. Now, the good news in all of this is that the suspect later surrendered. He admitted to the whole thing. He did say some disturbing things. He allegedly told troopers that he hated the governor. And in fact, if he had confronted the governor in the residence, he would have beat him with a hammer. That's very disturbing to hear. This suspect reportedly has mental health issues. He is in custody. The governor is safe. His family is safe. But this whole incident has raised a whole bunch of security issues. How did this happen? How was this person able to breach security and set the governor's mansion on fire? That brings us to our guest today, John Sansonito. He is the president of INA, which is Information Network Associates. John, thanks so much for coming on the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
John, before we get into all of this and what happened, give us some background about who you are and how long you've been in the security field.
Well, thank you. I'm a retired police officer who has worked as a security consultant now for going on 25 years now in the private sector, specifically working and helping companies protect their people, property, and data.
John, you heard about what happened at the governor's mansion. You saw the police report. You read the criminal complaint. What's your opinion of what happened? And how could this possibly have happened?
I think this incident should really mark as a wake-up call for how we protect government officials and high-profile individuals in a very hostile environment, which is the world we live in nowadays. This was not just an act of vandalism. This was a deliberate, intentional, and violent act committed against a sitting governor. This is a major escalation in the threat environment, and frankly, we are fortunate that the governor was not assassinated. This individual had access to his home. The governor was just upstairs from where this incident took place. This could have easily gone a much different way.
Yeah, it is really, really scary. So when you hear what happened, what do you think? What went wrong here?
I think there's a lot of things that went wrong, but I really think that, public records show that there were state police on site, and the state police have oversight of protecting the governor, both when he's traveling as well as at his residence. State police were on site when this incident happened, but somehow an individual managed to go over a fence, break out a window with a hammer, enter the residence, throw Molotov cocktails and set a fire inside, and then escape without ever being detected. So there's a lot of things that went wrong, but mostly from a security standpoint, the fact that this individual was able to get on the property, enter the residence, and also escape without ever being apprehended means that there are likely gaps in both perimeter security, detection systems, and also patrol coverage at the residence. It also raises a much bigger question, which is, what was this individual doing beforehand? Was he showing signs? Was he making threats towards the governor? Were those acts of violence predictable? And was his behavior potentially predictable? Most attackers don't just wake up one day and commit an act of violence. They're usually pre-incident behavior. It's whether or not anyone's watching for that behavior and whether or not chances were missed to identify this individual and intervene before this incident showed up at the governor's mansion.
Well, you hit on some really important points. And in fact, his mother reportedly said that, yeah, he was having problems. She did call police apparently 3 days before that he was having some mental health issues, that he was off his medication. She was concerned about him. And I guess the police did nothing about it. And it led to this act of violence.
Yeah, very unfortunate set of circumstances. And I realize that we live in a free society and people are free to make comments. But I definitely think there are warning signs with most attacks that an individual is escalating, that their mental health is potentially deteriorating, or that their violence is escalating. Usually these kind of attacks are a lifelong set of failures on an individual's part. They've experienced loss or failure or abuse of some sort, and this is their way of regaining control, because all violence is about control. This is this individual's way of trying to regain control of what's going on in his environment. So unfortunately, he acted out in such a way that he's using violence in order to gain a sense of control over his surroundings.
So let's talk about the perimeter. And I kind of want to paint a picture in case people don't know. The governor's mansion looks like a big rectangle, right? It's a very large building, and one side of the governor's mansion is along Front Street, along the Susquehanna River. The other side is along 2nd Street, and then you have another side, Maclay Street, and an alley next to a parking lot on the other side. And around the perimeter is really just a black wrought iron fence. In your opinion, is that enough? I feel like when I see that, I mean, it's beautiful to be able to see the mansion sitting along the river, but I feel like in a way they're sitting ducks.
Yeah, unfortunately, I do feel that security at the governor's mansion is probably not what it should be for someone of his status, and high profile individual like him needs to have better security around them. The governor's mansion, based on where it's located, is vulnerable because there are roads on 4 sides of the governor's mansion, and that doesn't make it vulnerable. However, the fence around the perimeter is obviously not sufficient enough to be able to keep a determined individual out. It's not an anti-climb fence, although it may be a little bit difficult to scale. Obviously, this case proves that it can be scaled fairly easily. There's also a number of other things as you're looking at the residence. There are a lot of shrubbery and trees close to the perimeter. In security, we always prefer to have a 10-foot clearance on either side of a fence in order to have line of sight and be able to have visual observation of those, also to not deter or interfere with video cameras that may be on the perimeter, and also to not be capable of having an individual hide there or conceal objects within that perimeter area. So just looking at the perimeter of the governor's mansion, there are some things that could be improved. And, you know, over the last few months, I've been particularly busy doing residential surveys, particularly after the assassination of the United Healthcare CEO. There have been a lot of companies that have asked me to go out and do security assessments for their CEOs and their executive teams. And unfortunately, what we find is that these individuals typically do not have a strong sense of security, or they oftentimes have very lax security measures at their home, and the smart companies are going out and getting in front of that, having security assessments done at those locations so that they can head off something like this from happening.
So you mentioned something earlier about the troopers who were on the site. And for people who don't know, the governor is protected by state troopers. It is called the executive detail. And when you enter the governor's residence from the one end along Maclay Street, there is a room right there to the right. And it reminds me of a control room at a television station, that two troopers are sitting in there and they're watching screens with all of the cameras, because there are cameras all over the property. There are cameras in every room on the first floor. That's really a public area. And then the private residence is upstairs. There are also cameras outside. There are some questions about how many troopers were on duty the night of this fire. And I posed a bunch of questions to Pennsylvania State Police, and I want to go over this with you, John. I asked, what's standard protocol? How many troopers on the executive detail should be stationed at the residence while the governor and his family are there? How many troopers were on duty the night of the fire? Are the troopers only inside the mansion in that security room, or are they walking the perimeter? Do the troopers guard the family upstairs in the private area? And this is the response that I got from Pennsylvania State Police spokesperson, quote, "For security reasons, we cannot disclose the complement of any station, troop, or office in whole or during any particular shift, nor can we answer questions regarding specific assignments and duties of the executive detail." Is that the right answer, or should they have been more transparent?
I think always when you are talking about the protection of a dignitary, there are certain details that they're not going to release. I do think that over time, some of these details and information will come to light, but it doesn't surprise me that they did not or decline to answer these questions at this time. I think there has to be a certain level of protection around any dignitary, and I think that failure to answer those questions is the proper thing in this particular case. I think that hopefully this gives an opportunity for a more thorough assessment of the governor's mansion to be done, and the potential for staffing to be increased. I have no insight into exactly the security protocols at the governor's mansion, but it doesn't sound like they had enough individuals on site to be able to deal with a threat like this. The individuals, and according to the affidavit, the state police had monitored the person. They saw the person breach the perimeter, but they had difficulty locating that individual. While they were attempting to locate the individual, the individual was able to enter the residence, break out windows, enter the residence, throw in these Molotov cocktails, and then escape and scale the fence again and leave the residence. And he was arrested only after they received a tip and after he's turned himself in. But in that particular environment, it's obvious they did not have enough staff in order to confront an individual. So when we think about security, you have to think about concentric rings of security. So you have an outer perimeter, you have an intermediate zone, which is that distance between the fence and the home. You have the exterior of the building itself, and then you have interior security. So on the outer perimeter, things to look out for is to have an anti-climb fence around the property, to have vegetation that doesn't obstruct views, and cameras around that outer perimeter. Then you have an intermediate zone, which is really an opportunity to delay, detect, and defend the residents. So that intermediate zone gives people a chance to be able to identify individuals moving around the property, be able to intercept them, to be able to do things such as potentially have barricades or other things that delay the individual from accessing the residence. Then that building exterior is actually the doors, the locks on the doors, the windows themselves. Was there protective film on the windows to make them more difficult to enter? What you're really doing is talking about buying time. So by having deadbolt locks, by having secure doors that are difficult to penetrate, that buys time for the response to occur. By having film on windows, it makes the windows more resistant to breakage. It delays the amount of time from near seconds to minutes in which it takes for an individual to actually penetrate the outer perimeter of the building. I can't speak to what measures were in place, but I definitely think that film on the windows would have delayed an individual from entering the property. And then, of course, you have, if all else fails, you have inner protection, or potentially you have safe rooms or other things in order to protect the residents once an individual does penetrate the residence itself. But it's all about delaying, detecting, and then defending the residents. And obviously, there was a failure of all three of those things in this particular case.
Yeah, getting back to how many troopers were part of the executive detail that night, and they're not really saying, they're not commenting on that. I have a lot of sources within, and they're telling me that there should be at least 2 troopers. Although they, like I said, they did not comment on how many troopers were on duty that night. My sources within say that at least 2. If there were 2 on duty that night, is that enough to guard and protect the governor in that big area? Is that enough in your opinion?
I think that's a very large campus to have only 2 individuals guarding it at any given time, especially if those individuals' duties also included monitoring the cameras and also protecting the family. So you have to understand that there's a difference between perimeter security and close protection details. I'm sure that the state police are very good at the close protection, the movement of the dignitaries from one location to another, the close protection, the threats moving the individual and immediately around the individual. But having been in law enforcement and then being on the security side, I can tell you that most police officers make lousy security guards. Their level of training and expertise makes them bad security guards because they tend to grow bored with common things such as perimeter checks, such as other things. And I can't speak for the state police or the troopers on duty here. I really don't know the details of exactly what happened. But I can only tell you from my experience that there is a difference between police and security. They have a different mission. They have different functions. And particularly when you're talking about executive protection, they have a different detail or a different mission even past that. A close protection detail protects the dignitary or the principal, and their job is to get them out of harm's way and protect them at all costs. They should never leave the sides of the dignitaries that they're protecting. Law enforcement has a different role where their job is to apprehend an intruder and or to use force to stop somebody from entering a location. Security is very good at patrolling the exterior perimeter, and they often, if they are armed, can take actions into their hands as well in order to protect that. Obviously, there was a breakdown in many things here. So going back full circle to what you're talking about, if there were 2 troopers and their sole job or their job duties included watching the monitors, doing routine patrols, guarding the family, and then tracking an individual on property, that's not enough, obviously, in this case, to be able to do that kind of that activity. This is just too big of a property with a lot of opportunities for people to hide, a lot of trees and shrubbery that are high, which would conceal someone, conceal objects. And obviously, there was a breakdown in this particular case, in part because of all those things.
Yeah, and it's mind-boggling that really what occurred, the executive detail is on one end of the residence and the intruder entered on the other end of the residence. And what is just scary too, for people who have an intimate knowledge of the governor's residence. I've been in there many times for social reasons and social functions, and also for work reasons, reporting in the governor's mansion. And where the incident happened, it's a big stateroom. But what is so scary to me is that this person was able to get in so quickly. And what people don't realize is that stateroom, there's another door, then you can go down the hallway and go upstairs and get to the governor. So this person turned around and left when in fact he could have gone down the hallway and gone upstairs, and who knows what could have happened. Again, threatening remarks, telling troopers if he had confronted the governor, he would have beat him with the hammer. We're talking about security outside, inside as well, John. Should there be changes inside the residence as well to protect the governor and his family?
I'm sure that there will be a review of this incident and that a thorough security assessment will be conducted. And I think that security assessment has to include all the things we talked about: the outer perimeter, their immediate perimeter, the perimeter of the house, and also then the interior of the home, building in safeguards in all those places. I'm sure that some of those things existed, but obviously it was not enough to stop out and keep out a determined individual. So I do believe that an independent assessment by an independent party is in order, and I think this goes to not just the governor, But a lot of high-ranking officials who are high-profile are also vulnerable. We think about protecting people while they're on the job, but oftentimes we fall down in protecting them at their residences, them and their families who are most vulnerable when they're at home. And there's been a series of high-profile incidents around the country where high-profile individuals have been attacked at their homes. Going back to Paul Pelosi in 2022, where an intruder broke into his home and hit him with a hammer, and likely would have gone much worse. But he did suffer some serious injury in that attack. Had the police not been involved, though, that could have gotten really ugly in a hurry. Justice Brett Kavanaugh in 22 also in Chevy Chase, Maryland, had a man with a knife, a gun, and burglary tools arrested outside his home because the individual was upset about his political rulings on Roe versus Wade. Representative Lee Zeldin in October 22 in New York had a drive-by shooting in front of his home. And while that was not targeting him, his family members were playing in the front yard. His kids were in the front yard when that happened. Not to mention, you also had the assassination of the CEO of United Healthcare, who was assassinated while going to a conference.
John, we talked about what went wrong at the governor's mansion. If you were called in to make an assessment, what would you say that needs to change both on the outside the perimeter and inside the mansion to make it more secure?
I think that the first thing I would do is to take a harder look at the fence that is around the property. I would put a better fence up, and I realize this is not inexpensive, but I think that it's an investment in the protection of our governor. I believe that an anti-climb fence would be in order. They have great fencing now that makes it much more difficult to climb. It delays the amount of time or increases the amount of time that it would take for someone to scale a fence. I think that a new fence around the perimeter of the property is in order. I would also make some investments in technology. There are AI enhancements that can be put over existing video systems, which can help in tracking an individual. They coupled with other technology, makes it so that the cameras can actually follow an individual, put a box around movement in a video grid in order to track an individual as they move about the property. In this particular case, it appears as if the troopers lost track of where the individual was. Using technology that is available, can help them track exactly where the motion is occurring, where the individual is on the property, help track a person all the way from the exterior to the breach of the perimeter to the residence and so forth. I think potentially some thermal imaging and some infrared surveillance technology might be in order. These are technology essentially that can monitor in low light. They can, but they can't be obscured by vegetation. Detection of cameras and movement is only as good as the cameras can see. So I definitely think that, that technology coupled with some revisions of some of the vegetation, cutting down some of the bushes on the perimeter and also in the area of the residence. I think tripwire sensors deploying layered intrusion systems that can detect immediate alerts when a subject enters a restricted zone enables a faster response and minimizes some blind spots, and also dedicated staffing. Security levels must be sufficient to ensure that monitoring response and executive protection functions are not all assigned to the same person simultaneously, that those tasks can be split up amongst proper staffing for that. And obviously some advanced training is in order so to have better drills and coordination among the individuals using the technology. Some training and some drills is obviously a good starting point once you have those things in place.
I feel like that maybe they were just a little lax. Nothing's happened at the governor's residence. And I feel that maybe they just got a little lackadaisical and thought, hey, nothing's happened. Nothing's going to happen here. Do you think that might have played into it?
Yeah, it definitely appears that was the case. And that is the problem with security. It is, 99% boredom with 1% sheer terror. And that goes for law enforcement and security work in general. Most of the time you are sitting around with nothing happening, and you're, it can be very boring, particularly on the night shift.
Yeah.
But, I would say that we are at a point now with our society, though, that security cannot be an afterthought. If someone can approach the home of a sitting governor, break in, set it on fire, and leave without being apprehended, and in that case, this asks some serious questions about how we're protecting the people that lead our country. We have to take security more seriously. I think that no one wants to believe that something can happen to them, but the reality is that the world we live in means that there are a lot of individuals out there with hostile intent, and it's the job of security and law enforcement to guard the individuals who are leading our country and our state. So it is very important that we take a look at these kind of things. We are very lucky in this case that the governor was not assassinated, and I know that may seem a little harsh, but as you mentioned, this individual had access to the residence. And while I don't know what physical barriers may have been between that part of the residence and the sleeping areas, I do know that the governor was home with his family. Yeah. Anyone could have been in the outer perimeter going to the kitchen to get a glass of water, could have been in another part of the home watching TV. We're very fortunate in this case that this was not much worse than what it was. And, we definitely have to take a look and define what makes secure, because clearly this time, the governor's mansion was definitely not secure.
And I just want to point out that the governor has, in fact, praised state police, saying that he's never questioned them or what they're doing. And he praised them for their work. He praised the Harrisburg Fire Department for their quick action and putting out the fire. The fire chief did say that, in fact, as I had described before, this is a big stateroom where this Molotov cocktail was thrown into, igniting this fire. And then there are double doors that go down a long hallway to another part of the residence, and a staircase that takes you up into the private residence. And the fire chief said, thank God those double doors were closed, because the fire could have then gone down the hall. And when, we always hear that cliche, oh, things could have been much worse. Oh, this could have been a hell of a lot worse. That fire could have gone down the hallway. The suspect could have gone down the hallway, could have gone into the private residence. So this is really, it's unbelievable. It is unbelievable. I'm still having a hard time understanding how this person got in and was able to do that level of damage in that short amount of time. The governor was very, very emotional. And no, he's not being dramatic. I mean, his family was threatened. He was threatened. His family was threatened. His children were sleeping there. And we all have to be grateful that no one was hurt. And yeah, the fire caused millions of dollars in damage, but it's just that type of damage, and we can rebuild that. A loss of life is a whole different thing, John.
I totally agree with you. And, in closing, I would like to just say, I'm not criticizing the troopers that were on duty. Yeah. I believe that they did their very best to be able to protect the governor with the circumstances that they had. What I am questioning is, I think this is a failure much higher in leadership. This is not looking at proper security safeguards, not having proper staffing levels. I'm not criticizing the individual troopers. I am criticizing the administration, if you will, that had this in place and had so few individuals to protect such an important asset.
Yeah, I completely understand that. And you said something earlier that I absolutely agree with. This is a wake-up call. And do you think, you mentioned the assassination attempt on the president. You mentioned the assassination of that healthcare CEO. Do you think businesses, corporations in general need to stop, not just elected officials, but going beyond that? Like this climate that we're in, that things are so volatile and there's violence everywhere, and they're burning Tesla dealerships. Should businesses, corporations take a closer look at what they're doing and reassess their security measures?
Yeah, and I can tell you that is happening. I have never been so busy doing security assessments as I am now. I can tell you that it started with the United Healthcare worker, our CEO assassinated in New York. That really opened up a new level of awareness among the C-suite, if you will, the corporate executives, to realize that they were vulnerable. And I can tell you that all companies are now looking at that, or or large companies at least, are looking at how do they protect their corporate executives, particularly when traveling, but also at home. And I can tell you that I have done dozens of residential security assessments since the assassination of that healthcare CEO. And I expect that I will get busier as time goes on, as companies are becoming more and more aware that they have a duty to protect the people who they have put into high profile and very visible positions. And that it goes for both the corporate and the political world.
It's sad that we are at this state, but it is reality, and we have to respond to what is going on. As we close out this podcast, do you have any closing thoughts?
I think that, we all have to take a deep breath and realize that we really did dodge a much more serious incident. I think that we all can learn from these lessons. And I think that this is a good opportunity to kind of do a reset on security of both government officials and people in high profile positions. But I would recommend that if you're worried about your security or the security of your executives in your company or politicians, it's time to have a proper security survey done, so that you can identify vulnerabilities and address those vulnerabilities. The time is to be proactive, not to be reactive. Once an incident happens, it's much too late.
All right, John Sansonita, thanks so much for coming on the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks, John. Again, the governor was very, very emotional, but very grateful that he and his family were not harmed in this tragic chain of events. They were evacuated from the residence. Nobody was hurt. While he was extremely emotional, he was also very defiant, saying that he would not live in fear. They would rebuild the governor's mansion, and they would come back from this horrible, horrible tragedy. And we are just extremely grateful that the governor and his family were not hurt in this tragedy. Thanks so much for tuning in to this podcast. Please like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. That way, every time we come out with a new podcast episode, you will get an alert. Thanks again for tuning in. Have a great day, and we'll be back soon with a new podcast episode.